Welcome to Cornhole Champions, Iowa Starting Line's weekly podcast where we throw bags at the state's biggest stories. I'm Zachary Oren Smith. Iowa has the second highest cancer rate in the nation, and we're the only state where cancer rates are actually increasing. Today, we're digging a little deeper in the link between agricultural practices and cancer. My guest is Chris Jones, a research engineer who spent years studying Iowa's water quality issues before his work became too politically uncomfortable for some state lawmakers. Jones is the author of The Swine Republic, Struggles with the Truth About Agriculture and Water Quality, and president of the Driftless Water Defenders. He's here to walk us through what the science tells us about farming, water pollution, public health. Hello, Chris.
Good morning, Zach.
Good to have you on, man. I wanted to begin in my recent piece. When this interview airs, it'll be last week's piece. I highlighted how Iowa's uses of pesticides, how Iowa uses more pesticides per capita than any other state, nearly 54 million pounds annually. But you've suggested that when it comes to cancer risk, we might be focusing on the wrong chemicals. Can you break down which pesticides should actually be keeping us up at night?
So firstly, let's say it's very difficult to prove direct cause and effect relationships on environmental health. And so, it takes a long time to do that. So in some cases, decades. And even then, oftentimes, there can be some uncertainty. And so different chemicals have different effects on different people. And so the exposure for one person isn't going to result in the same consequences as the exposure on another person.
Right.
And so when we have these discussions, we have to keep that in mind.
Totally.
The other thing, too, is it's not necessarily just one particular pesticide. It's the fact that we are in this sort of cocktail of ag chemicals here in Iowa. And so many times one thing might not be harmful to us, but in combination with other things, then it does become harmful. And we know that that's the case. And so, there's so many things used to produce corn and soybeans here in Iowa. We have this cocktail of stuff. We never really know what we're being exposed to because that cocktail changes, the composition of that cocktail changes throughout the course of the year and depending on weather and other things. And so I just want to emphasize those points first. Everybody wants to talk about glyphosate because we use so much of it, right? And with the advent of GMO crops, we saw a huge increase in the amount of glyphosate. I think glyphosate is used on a very high percentage of our corn and soy acres, probably over 90%. And so we're using just an enormous amount of it. Is that the biggest thing to worry about? Well, maybe, just because the amount of it is so enormous, but we have other things out there that we don't talk about very much. And so the neonicotinoids that we coat our seeds with now, and so these prevent decay of the seeds after they're planted in the soil and presumably provide some protection to the seed until it germinates. Almost all of our corn and soy is coated with these things now. And so these are being detected all over the place. We know that they are toxic to insects, especially bees. And so there's been quite a lot of research connecting these things to the decline of bees and other pollinators. And so when we see that a chemical is toxic to other species, that presents the idea that it's maybe toxic to our species too, right? And so we know that's been detected. It's been detected in the drinking water sources here in Iowa City, both at the University Treatment Plant and at the Iowa City Treatment Plant. We know it's detected in the effluent from ethanol plants. And so when farmers bring the corn into the ethanol plants and it's processed into ethanol, they discharge water to the stream network. We know that neonicotinoids have been detected in that water. And so this stuff is becoming ubiquitous in the environment. We've had far less time to study it than we have glyphosate, for example. And so there's some uncertainty about what the health consequences could be for this.
I was kind of interested in a point you made, and we were texting off air a bit about this story, and you were saying that glyphosate gets a lot of attention, but we've really shifted to glyphosate away from some older herbicides that might have created new problems that we're not talking enough about. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, I think there's some truth to the idea that glyphosate is less toxic than a lot of the stuff it displaced.
Hmm.
And so glyphosate kills everything, right? It kills grasses and it kills forbs. And so forbs are leafy plants. And so it's a very wide, what we call broad spectrum, right? Kill everything. And the only reason that corn and soy survive it is because they have had genes inserted into their into the seeds, right? That keep them from dying upon exposure.
Mm-hmm.
And even so, when you see glyphosate sprayed on a soybean field, it does cause stress to the soybeans. You see them turn yellow for a period of time, but then they eventually recover. And so glyphosate is this broad spectrum herbicide, but it did replace some stuff that was really pretty toxic, both to the plants and to human beings. And so I think there's some merit to the argument that glyphosate actually, in the total sort of toxicity, if you will, maybe reduced that across the landscape. But predictably, weeds are becoming resistant to glyphosate. And we knew this was going to happen. We know that this happens in nature. It's natural selection. And like a pigweed plant. That's one of the weeds that's very common in Iowa. Well, one pigweed plant can produce 1 million seeds. And if only one of those seeds is resistant to the herbicide, then next year that germinates and it's producing 1 million herbicide resistant individuals, right? And so that's how it works. And so this weed resistance comes on fast. As a result, farmers are starting to revert to some of the old stuff, some of the old bad stuff, to kill these resistant weeds. And dicamba is one of those things. And so now we see scientists have developed dicamba-ready crops, much like Roundup-ready crops, where the dicamba won't kill the crop, but it will kill the weeds. Well, dicamba is some bad stuff because it drifts, and especially on hot days. And so it volatilizes very easily. If it's applied on a hot, windy day, gets picked up by the wind and it's blown all over Iowa. And so everybody in Iowa now is breathing in this dicamba. And, what are the consequences of that? Well, we haven't really used dicamba much over the last 30 years since Roundup came out. And now all of a sudden we've got everybody breathing dicamba. And so what are the possible health consequences that might result for this? We don't know, right? It's uncertain.
I think one of the things I was kind of interested in was that it's not just one-time exposure to this one thing in mass, right? The way like say a chemical spill at a plant might kind of impact someone's health. It's this kind of like ambient, low-level exposure that a lot of Iowans are kind of getting. Yeah, have become are accustomed to, I guess, at this point, right? We're kind of used to this kind of being a reality. There's kind of a reality of exposure here, but is there a limit to that conversation? Does that? I think you've been publicly pretty frustrated with that kind of, I don't know, response to this conversation around regulating the use of pesticides in our fields.
So, firstly, what you're talking about there are chronic exposures, which are being exposed over a long period of time. What are the health consequences of that? And acute exposures, where you're exposed to a lot in a very brief time. And so, for example, if a farmer's pouring the chemical into the piece of equipment that's going to apply it and he spills a bunch on himself or he breathes a bunch of it in, that's an acute exposure.
Right.
When you drink a small amount in your drinking water over the course of a lifetime, that's a chronic exposure. And so when we talk about chemicals, two things are important here: the dose and the duration of the dose. And so all these things factor into an equation on whether or not there's going to be health consequences. Am I frustrated with the discussion? I don't know if that's. I suppose that's accurate. I think the. I think the on the part of the industry, the knee-jerk reaction is everything is safe, right? And Katie, bar the door, get it out there as quickly as possible. And we've got some lab studies. EPA or FDA has approved one thing or another, and of course, as we can see now, that can be very political, right? And how these agencies are run and managed, and what science is reported. And so, I think there's some skepticism on, what's safe and what's not safe, and can we believe what these agencies are telling us? And so, instead of erring on the side of caution, it seems to me that the industry is far too quick to err on the side of getting it out there as quickly as possible, because this is a tool we need, right? Because of Roundup or resistance on weeds or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I want to emphasize is that if you drive around Iowa these days, you see crop dusters everywhere. Mm-hmm. It's like the D-Day invasion almost of crop dusters across Iowa. And what they're spraying right now is fungicides. And we know these fungicides are very toxic to fish, very, very toxic to fish. And so when these guys spray on top of a stream or a lake, we get fish kills, and then they're gone, right? They fly in, they fly out, they're gone, and we have a fish kill, and nobody knows how it happened.
Right.
Well, we're learning now that these fish kills are being caused by these crop dusters. Well, why do we need so many crop dusters now? Because we plant a very high density of seeds in our fields. 50 years ago, we might have planted about 10,000 corn seeds per acre. Now we maybe apply 30 to 40,000. And so the canopy in a cropped field is very dense. Not much not much sunlight gets down below the canopy. At the same time, we have our weather over the long haul getting wetter, and so it's made these fields more vulnerable to fungi, right, to fungal growths. And so now all of a sudden, we have this D-Day invasion of crop dusters spraying this crap all over Iowa. And of course, when you're spraying from the air, from maybe 100 feet up, well, the potential that that's going to land on somebody is pretty high, right? Mm-hmm. You might drive by in your car and get sprayed. You might be on a road and it's spraying over the top of your car, or it's spraying on neighbors' buildings or on their fruit trees or whatever. And I think this is a big, big thing that needs to be looked at. And again, farmers are saying, well, we need this tool because these fungus infections are such a terrible thing for crops nowadays. Well, again, maybe we need to err on the side of caution here.
Chris, I wondered if, so you, in addition to your book, you have a Substack by the same name, Swine Republic, looking at kind of water quality issues more broadly, looking at ag issues more broadly. And you published a piece that I wanted to see if you'd talk a little bit about, talking about like a progressive platform for water quality in the state. I think people are interested in water quality, right? I think Iowans want clean water. I think Iowans want clean air. I think Iowans are also acutely aware that agriculture is one of the biggest industries in our state, right? I think there are understandable concerns about the extent to which we are alienating part of the folks from the conversation, or over-indexing for them in the conversation, the way kind of industry interest would have it. I'm curious about if you kind of like both talk about a little bit about kind of what undergirds a progressive water quality platform, and kind of how we, as Iowans, create a conversation that doesn't alienate some stakeholders from it.
Well, we're led to believe that because we live in an agricultural state, we need to tolerate a certain level of pollution. And I reject that. I reject that notion in the modern day. I think there's many things we can do to reduce, if not eliminate, most of this pollution. And we refuse to do it because we have an economic establishment here that refuses to let it happen. And so that's my main position here. I think, a progressive policy is one, in my mind, that's good for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. It's good for everybody. It's good for a hairdresser working in Iowa City, and it's good for a school teacher in Des Moines, and it's good for a plumber working in Emmitsburg, and maybe it's good for agriculture too. And so I think we need policies now that are good for everyone and that contribute to the common good. That's what I call progressive, if it's contributing to the common good. And so, that's how I see this, and that's how I, crafted that piece that you're talking about. What here is good for the common good? What benefits the common good? These policies, we should not have policies that target agriculture, for their benefit, and then are harmful for everybody else. And so, Eisenhower's Secretary of Defense was this guy named Charles Wilson, and he came to that job from being a CEO at GM. And he famously said, "What's good for GM is good for America." Well, here we've had this conventional wisdom here that what's good for agriculture is good for Iowa. Well, in terms of environment and water quality and human health, maybe that's not true, right? Maybe what's good for agriculture is not good for Iowa. And I think we need to have the courage to talk about that.
If you wanted to get folks thinking about what what solutions could be on the table, right? Are there some places that you get them started? Obviously, any one action would take a lot of, would take a broad coalitional effort to get passed, right? There certainly is not a concentrated enough interest in the state to regulate this industry. But like, what ideas would you want people thinking about? What are some things that you think would be compelling to folks listening to this that maybe, I don't know, maybe they farm, maybe they have they come from a farming family, but maybe they're interested in this question of like the extent to which we're creating a healthy environment for our future?
Well, I would say there are a majority of people in Iowa that are for regulating the industry in terms of the environmental outcomes. I think that majority is there. Is the majority there amongst establishment elite and the political elite? Then I would say no, it's not there. But could we do? Well, look at how we spend money on farm conservation. And I did a paper with two other guys. We showed that every person in the United States born since 1930 has spent about $1,000 on farm conservation. Every person, every American born since 1930 has given the government $1,000 for farm conservation. And we still have not gotten the environmental outcomes that we want. And so, let's look at that money, how we're spending it, and what else could we do? Much of that money is designed to keep the corn, soy, CAFO system entrenched, right? We don't spend that money in an effort to get farmers to change what they're doing. We spend that money to try to put Band-Aids on the bleeding of pollution into our waters. Well, maybe we should spend that money in helping them transition to a different production system that's not going to pollute in the first place, right? That's one idea I would offer. We know there's other production systems that pollute far less or not at all. And so, what are those? Well, we need more diversity of crops on our fields. Instead of 2 crops, we maybe need 5, or between 3 and 5. Instead of raising animals in CAFOs, let's raise animals in these pastoral systems where they're grazing or they're eating forage crops like alfalfa and clovers and whatnot. We know those systems can produce a lot of calories for human consumption. But we stick with this corn, soy, CAFO system because that's what the establishment elite wants farmers to do. We can't expect farmers to just decide one day, oh, I'm going to grow apples, or, I'm going to grow oats, or whatever it might be. There has to be markets available for them where they can expect to sell the crop. And then there needs to be infrastructure across the state to support production of that crop. And so let's, instead of spending money on Band-Aids and diapers for the corn, soy, CAFO system, let's spend money on some infrastructure that would support alternative crop production and animal production systems.
The point you're making is that the government's already invested so much money into this infrastructure, has already invested into incentives and disincentives to certain kinds of production. You're saying that why are we not thinking more broadly about what the amount of money that we're already putting up to that cause? Why aren't we thinking about how it could contribute to a solution to this pollution problem that you're pointing to? Right.
I mean, the biggest example of this is fuel ethanol, and so the corn,
our sacred cow. Sorry, you're talking about slaughtering our sacred cow.
It is. The corn ethanol system exists for one reason and one reason only, and that's policy.
Creates a market for our corn. Creates a market for our soy.
Creates a guaranteed market for corn. It would not exist without the Renewable Fuel Standard, which became law in 2005. That's the only reason it exists. It doesn't exist.
For folks that may not know, the Renewable Fuel Standard is it requires a certain level of blend and fuel across the United States, including ethanol in your blend of gasoline. It's why when you go to the pump, you find the different percentages of ethanol in that blend of fuel you buy.
So 15 billion gallons of ethanol are required to be blended into petroleum in a year in the United States. And again, that exists for one reason only. It doesn't exist because it's good environmentally. It doesn't exist because you get better gas mileage. It doesn't exist for any of the other reasons. Cleaner air. It doesn't exist because it produces cleaner air. It exists for one reason only, and that's to gobble up all this surplus corn that we're growing. And so 60% of our corn in Iowa goes to produce ethanol. An area of land the size of 20 counties in Iowa is growing corn just to produce ethanol. How dumb is that? We get all this water pollution and perhaps cancer from this production. Does this make sense at all? In my mind, it does not. Let's take that land and see what else we could do with it. Could we grow food crops? Could we grow oats? Could we grow alfalfa? Whatever it might be. Could we graze cattle on it? These are the sort of things that creative policy would do. But because the industry, the ethanol industry and ag in general, they don't want to recapitalize. They're very much entrenched with what they're doing. And so ethanol has become the sacred cow, as you say. The presidential candidates have to come to Iowa for the first caucus, and they have to kneel down to the altar of ethanol.
Or go into the field and go grab a ear and bite it the way George H.W. Bush did.
Yeah.
Or was that George W.? George W. In the field. Incredible.
And so we need to have some honest conversations here about the policy and the perversity that it's created and the consequences it has had on the common good. Okay. And that's progressive. That's progressive when we talk about the common good. And so, so much of our politics now is focused on, very small percentages of the population, usually those that have lots and lots of money. And look, we need to change course here. I'm convinced of that.
That was Chris Jones, author of the Swine Republic. Chris, thanks for joining me.
All right, Zach, thanks.
That was another episode of Cornhole Champions. If you like what you heard here, do what you can to support us. 1, go subscribe to our show at our home on youtube.com. Subscribe and like the show to support values-driven media on the platform. 2, get my newsletter and get these episodes straight to your email every Wednesday morning. That's at cornholechampions.substack.com. 3, to catch the work that me and my colleagues are doing over at Iowa Starting Line, follow our Instagram and TikTok accounts. 4, sign up for Iowa Starting Line's flagship newsletter. Get our cancer series straight to your email right when it drops on Tuesdays. That's at iowastartingline.com/newsletter. Cornhole Champions is a weekly podcast powered by Iowa Starting Line. The podcast is produced by me and edited by Rebecca Steinberg. Our music is by Avery Mossman, and our show art is by Desiree Tapia. Cornhole Champions is a proud member of the Iowa Writers Collaborative. We'll see you with a new episode next week. Until then, I'm Zachary Oren Smith. Thanks for listening.